he did. So Scott?
Yeah, there was 4 weeks, and it would be A, B, C, and D. So during the first week in A lesson, he would give you a particular line based on chord changes that he composed. They were all composed. Really, you were studying his music. I know as far as guitarists go, we look at a lot of other guitar players, and there's merit to that. But this was somebody who, I mean, you were studying Dennis's music, so he would write out a line.
He called that, I think, the compositional device,
Yeah,
right?
right, he would call that a compositional
And how many
device.
lines was it, or did it vary?
It would vary, but when I started out, I'm thinking back to the first ones, it would be 4 bars, and there would be a bunch of chords. And well, the one thing that actually that Bobby had spoken about in playing the 12 keys, he would thwart guitarists, since we have that ability in bassists to have that ability to move a line and then it's the same key. He would thwart us by making us play off of every finger on every string. So if a line started on say a D note, you would find every D on the instrument and then have to play the line, so you had all different fingering. So he would, you know, you were thwarted at every turn. So once you did that, now that was one part of your lesson, then he would reduce the line into maybe, you know, 8 or 10 notes and write the chords from the first line on it. So now you had to harmonize the chords on all the different possible combinations of string groups and put the melody on every string. And that was only, you know, and then you would have an arpeggio.
And this is the first week, right?
This is the first week. And I forget what he would call it, A1, the A2, and then it was a full-time job.
Right.
Basically, it was full-time.
And then some.
Easily. And I remember just like was said, I just was so excited. I did nothing but practice. All the years that I was with him, I was with him 10 years, so less than these gentlemen. But I remember throughout all the 10 years, I just wanted to practice. That's all I wanted to do, was work on the material. It was truly inspiring. Right. And yeah, I lived, breathed, and ate all that stuff, and I took it right in. But it was a full-time job. And he would say, even just to hang, you know, you'd have to do at least 4 hours just to get the lesson somewhat happening. And that's not to really.
Right. You were married to it, basically.
Yes, basically. That was your A1.
Okay, so let's be real specific here. Let's recap. It was a compositional device,
right,
the first thing. What was the second part of the first week?
Yeah, the chords.
The chords.
So he would reduce that,
okay,
so then you would have to harmonize that result. And I believe, I don't know if somebody could help me, was the A3, was that an arpeggio?
You would have a strange,
that was an arpeggio.
some strange arpeggio.
Yeah, and they were all altered arpeggios and very extended.
Yeah, they had 7 notes.
Yeah, 7-note chords.
Yeah,
and that would be every string.
And you had 4 strings to work with.
Right, and what I wanted to say is with the double bass, I mean,
define what a double bass is.
I mean, with the acoustic bass, the upright bass, the double bass, it's the instrument that has 20 different names. The string bass, you know.
Contrabass.
The contrabass. With that instrument, the fingering symmetry is not the same as the guitar. So Fred and I would be expected to play our lessons in 12 keys, and it was very difficult to get that out. And also, Dennis was into a non-traditional approach. You know, you would have to devise, and I'm sure Fred could reinforce this. You would have to devise solutions to left-hand problems in order to try to even get the lesson out. You know, and also with a string instrument that didn't have any frets on it, a really important part of any of the 4 weeks was the ear training aspect of it. I mean, I know we all remember in the sight singing that we had to do, and Dennis was very specific about.
This is on the 4th week, the ear training. Yeah.
Third week.
Third week. I'm sorry.
Letter C was the third week. Was sight
C.
singing.
Okay.
And he never wanted the traditional sight singing books. There was one by 2 people named McCozen and Tibbs, which was impossible to buy after a while.
And it was.
Oh, you did? Okay.
Yeah. And that was the book that, and I finally bought a copy of it after years of borrowing people's Xerox. It was insane.
And was it a sight singing book?
Yes, it was a sight singing book, but it was. And that's an interesting part of Dennis's literature, because that book, it ties into another part of the 4-week sequence. That book contained, if you remember it, it contained melodies from other cultures, folk melodies from around the world, Hungary, wherever, India. And then Dennis, as part of your training, Dennis would assign scales for you to learn that came from other cultures.
Exotic scales.
Yeah, exotic scales from all over the world, and you were expected to use them and write with them and also play them on your instrument in all keys. You know, I mean, we talk about the effect of Dennis's teaching and what the 4-week cycle did. I know one of the things it did to me, and this sort of this kind of goes to what Fred said a minute ago. Someone early on said to me, "Don't ask him about it. Don't try to figure it out. You're just going to get yourself into a mess. You know, don't ask. Just do it." Yeah. And so I did. And what happened to me was, I was playing a job with a jazz duo gig with a pianist that I knew that I hadn't played with him for a while, and I had been studying with Dennis. And he didn't know it, that I was studying with Dennis. And after we got to the first intermission, he said, "What have you been doing? What's going on here? Your playing has changed. Something's going on." And I told him about it. But that was part of the A1, B1, C1 was hearing. It was ear training. I mean, that's one of my favorite Dennis quotes. "Well, Craig, today we're going to add another 20 pounds to the barbell of the ear."
That's wonderful. So, okay, let's get this very specific, though. Okay. The first week was a compositional device, the chord reharmonization, the arpeggio. Second week was, do you want to pick up on this, Fred? Do you remember?
Yeah. I remember my lessons early on were a chord and with an added tone to it, like a D with a ninth, and then it'd be the flat ninth and the sharp ninth, and then we'd go through the 11s and the altered fifths, then the sixths, then the sevenths, and while I guess the basic premise of those exercises was harmonic in nature, they also had a rhythmic component that, looking back on them, was very interesting and affected your whole pulse of how you played. And they were like groups of notes. There was some inner logic to them that started to become your musical vocabulary. And earlier when I mentioned that, like, things started coming out as I was playing, so it was both harmonic and rhythmic, and it was very fascinating. And the B's and the C's tended to be, for me, a little bit easier, so they were kind of the fun weeks for me, if you could call it fun.
Okay. But it still had the initial part of letter B and C, you still had something to work on in keys. You had a melodic excerpt, a compositional excerpt that Dennis would write for you that was usually about 4 measures long. And it would be about variations, like Fred was saying. You'd add notes to a chord or to a scale. You'd alter a chord, and then there would be a melody that he would compose for you to learn that was based on that alteration, whatever it was. You know?
Back to the ear training. I remember my first lesson. He said, "Go home and transcribe giant steps," and I almost died, because this is back in the day prior to digital recorders that you couldn't slow things down. And I couldn't do it. I just couldn't do it. What were some of your memories of Dennis's?
Well, my favorite week, because you know he would always. I mean, the transcribing, which in a lot of the so-called music programs now, that's like the high point. I mean, that was the C week. You would transcribe 8 bars. That was like the least. I mean, it sounds. I mean, yeah. Of course, transcribing anything at 300 on a metronome is not easy. But it wasn't really that was. You know, small potatoes with Dennis. The D week was, to me, the week that everything opened up, because it was you had to take the material the way I understood it. I may have just understood it my way, and he let me just do the way I understood it, which I think sometimes he would do that. But you would compose using the materials from the first 3 weeks in the cycle. You know, you had chord progressions you could use, and you were supposed to use notes from the line. So that struggle to take that, and then you would also write a solo on the stuff that you had composed. So, and that's a very interesting idea, that on the one hand, he had, at the same time you were composing a melody, you were also to compose a solo. So then what's the difference between a melody and a solo? I mean, really, that's a very, in terms of jazz thinking, that's a very profound idea right there. But trying to utilize his material in composing, taking the fragments of that and dealing with that, for me really created a lifetime for me, because I've really sort of become a composer, and I've gotten money to compose and done things with composing, which I never, I was never trained in it. And I mean, I took maybe 2 years of composition in the university, and now I won awards. The other guys who won the same awards were the head of the theory department at Penn and the head of the theory department at Temple. That's where I studied. I studied with Dennis, and he was, completely sort of trusted the students' tendencies and innate abilities, and would, without forcing you or putting you in a box. He had no. Then there's one thing, I go up now sometimes and I meet with Ornette Coleman, and one thing Ornette talks about, who's a famous person. Dennis wasn't famous like that. He always says music shouldn't be about style. Music is about ideas. Dennis was the most perfect example, where there was no, it wasn't about bebop. It wasn't about learning to play, post-modal, it was about musical ideas, and he could share stuff. Now, I like to say one thing, you're talking about ear training. For me, I had always had the hardest time, even on the saxophone, by playing the alto saxophone in tune. It was terrible for me. I was ready to just play baritone. I played more in tune. I was ready to almost quit the alto, which was the instrument I loved. I could never, it's sad to say, but it was true. I studied with Dennis, and like you said, he wasn't a saxophone teacher. He never said to me, push the reed in, pull the reed, use a different mouthpiece, go play long tones all day. He just gave me that stuff. He made me hear my own sound. That was really, in a sense, the essence. If someone had to say one sentence, what did he do for you? I'd say, he made me hear my own sound. And then, because all your music proceeds from really hearing yourself. And the way that he taught and the way that he guided me was to really hear my own sound, and then you get it together. I remember one time I was really struggling with the piano, because I used to write and I was so slow. And he'd say, if you want to play the piano, just get a book and you can learn to play the piano. No problem.
So we had just heard some of Dennis's music. Now, we have to wrap up, but I want to go to each of you, and if Dennis were alive, what is one thing you would say to him today? Scott, we'll start with you.
Really puts me on the spot. It would be great to have him back. I miss him every day. He passed away not too long ago, and every day I still think of him. He was really important to me as a person, not just as a teacher.
Right. Craig?
Yeah, I remember when my own father passed away, Dennis was like a second father to me at that time. He was very kind and loving, and he was a great friend. And the music was unbelievable, but the human being behind it was fully as unique, and I consider myself privileged to have known him. And I agree with Scott. I miss him. I wish I could talk to him now. It would be great.
Yeah, well, you are. And Fred?
Dennis was a very close friend. He was much like an older brother, and he always supported you and encouraged you to be yourself. That's a rare thing in today's world. I really miss him.
Yeah. And we have less than 1 minute, you too, so Bobby.
I miss him so much. He was such a treasure, wonderful, fantastic human being. Yeah. I really loved him.
Yeah. And Joe?
I got to know him because he lived with me so long. So you lose a real close, intimate friend. Yeah. It's hard.
Yeah. I want to say it's really an honor to have you guys on. First of all, you're warm people. You're phenomenal musicians. I know that. The ones I haven't had on my show, I've heard so much about, and I plan to have the ones that weren't on the show to be future guests. But it's my honor to have you on, and we'll be back also for part 2 of Dennis's life.